Hi everyone, I'm Susan Etlinger coming to you live from Attic Studios in Long Island City, New York. I have the honor to be here today with the Adobe think tank. We are going to be talking about artificial intelligence. If you'd like to follow us, please go to the Adobe Facebook page and follow us there, or on Twitter at #AdobeTT. This is the 10th think tank that Adobe has done. They focused on all sorts of topics, but today we're going to dive into AI. I am surrounded by a crew that you are not going to believe. It's an amazing crew of founders, CEOs, folks from the consulting industry, technologists, business people, and we've been having a hell of a time getting it together to talk to you today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I'd like to introduce this astounding group. First, over here, we've got Mr. Anand Rao, who is Partner and Global Innovation Lead at PwC. To his left, we have Janet Eggers, who's the CEO of Neuralogics. This is Chris Duffy, everybody, Head of AI Innovation and Strategy at Adobe. Theo Lau, founder of Unconventional Ventures. To my right here, Robbie Allen, CEO of Infinia ML. To my left, we have Catherine Hume. She's the VP of Product and Strategy at Integrate AI. Tom Goodwin, EVP and Head of Innovation at Zenith Media. Catherine Havasi. Catherine is the Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder at Luminoso. And then last but definitely not least, Mr. Chris Benson, Chief Scientist, AI and Machine Learning, Honeywell SPS. Thank you all so much for being here. Again, if you'd like to follow us on Twitter, we're at #AdobeTT. And we're going to be talking about the future of AI in the enterprise. So enterprise people, pay attention. Three things we're going to talk about today. We're going to do 3 separate sessions. We're going to focus and go a little bit in depth. You're going to have questions, I guarantee you, so please do submit them to us using that hashtag. The first thing that we're going to talk about is the future of technology. The next thing that we're going to talk about is the business and workplace transformation. And then the last place we're going to talk about, and you're going to have a lot of questions about this too, is sort of the societal and macroeconomic impact of AI. So before we get started, I'm just going to tee things up a tiny little bit. It seems like AI is everywhere these days. We're hearing about it, we're seeing it, we're buying it. We've got recommendation engines, predictive text in messaging. There is AI in Facebook, in products that we see. It's pretty much become an ambient phenomenon. But at the same time, even with the rise of Alexa, with the beginnings of autonomous vehicles, it's still very, very new. It's sort of simultaneously very new and very old. And it kind of dates back even to 1950 when Alan Turing, you know, that Alan Turing, asked the question, can machines think? We've gone through a lot in the last almost 70 years. There have been periods of tremendous innovation. There have been periods of what people call the AI winters, when things just stalled out, either due to lack of funding or hitting technology barriers. But we've gotten to a point today now where we have the criteria to make AI really happen, not only in the enterprise, but in society as well and in culture as well. So those 3 criteria are, we are swimming in data. You can call it big data, you can call it lots of data, whatever you want to call it, feel free, but just tremendous amounts of data. We've also seen an incredible increase in just improvements in machine learning algorithms. And then of course the thing that makes it all possible is the dramatic drop in parallel processing costs. And so it makes it economical for us to do this. So we're at this point now. Obviously, there's a lot of question about what AI really is, what it isn't. I'll let you in on a little secret. We've had a lot of discussion internally here, and you're going to hear a little bit of that now. So before we go any further, I'd like to open this up, and I'm going to start with I'm going to pick Catherine actually at random and ask her to give her definition of what AI is. And then we're going to open this up, have a little bit of a larger talk, and you can get a sense of why this is kind of a bigger question than it sounds like. Catherine.
Sure, thanks for having me start off with the easy question, defining artificial
Yeah,
intelligence.
sorry about that.
So I think there's a couple of ways to think about it. I think probably many of us around the table would agree that there's one more psychological definition of AI, that is whatever computers can't do until they can. So let's take two examples, one being Google Maps. So a product that I'm sure, did anybody use Google Maps to come here today, right? So things that we're really familiar with. A product that is built using data and machine learning and lots of these terms that we hear about when we talk about AI these days, but that most people out there wouldn't really, it's not the first app that comes to mind when they're thinking about artificial intelligence. On the flip side, we have something like self-driving cars, which everybody's like, oh, absolutely, autonomous vehicles, definitely a key example of AI. So the one, it seems old. It seems old hat. It's transitioned from something that's just barely possible into sort of a commoditized product. The other one is just on the fringe of possibility. And that is a great sweet spot for sort of psychological common perceptions of AI. More technically, I personally, given my background and things that I focus on, like to think about AI today mostly being systems built using data and algorithms, machine learning, whose performance can improve over time. So I'd like to think about Maslow's hierarchy of data science capabilities. And here I'm thinking back to my former colleague, Hilary Mason from Fast Forward Labs. She deserves the credit for coming up with this hierarchy. And on the bottom, you have sort of big data, right? Our ability to collect, store, and process data at scale. On top of that, we have analytics, so we can count things. We might be able to multiply, divide, do some sort of simple math. And that's great, because we can learn about the past to make good decisions in the future. On top of that, we have sort of data science. So we start to go from being able to count to sort of making more complex math functions. And we can not only inform qualitative decisions, but actually start to bake in quantitative predictions about the future. When we get to sort of machine learning, we go from taking these complex functions and being able to adapt them over time as we get new data. And we can go from having sort of straight functions to sort of more complex ones that enables new capabilities like processing videos or speech or text. And I think about that in terms of the complex set of capabilities. There's other forms of technologies, operations research, so logistics optimization that might be considered AI. Expert systems where we build in and we bake in rules, where we take everything that's in Susan's brain and we encode that in a system so that we can automate these more complex processes in the future. But a lot of the really big capabilities that are taking off fall under a subsection of machine learning called deep learning or reinforcement learning that are starting to enable us to work on data like text, videos, images that have historically been intractable and that are really leading to breakthroughs in the enterprise.
So that's a fantastic, I think, technology view of what AI is. Anand, can you talk a little bit about how you see AI, and then let's keep going.
Yeah. So I very much agree with what Catherine was saying in terms of the data analytics and the AI. We also try to think of AI much more in terms of how it helps us in an enterprise, work with us and work with other computing systems. So we think of it more in terms of any computer system that can sense, think, and act along with other human beings, along with other computer systems to achieve a certain purpose, to achieve a certain objective. And that manifests itself whether it's a financial services company where you have, when you say sensing, you have a lot of text documents. So analyzing that to us is part of AI. It's called natural language processing, understanding, and even generation. So that goes into one part of sensing. Similarly, you sense with text, you can also look at things. So cameras, almost every facility now has a camera. Can you take those videos and then identify objects, classify objects? That's all AI is doing. So that's all the sensing part. Then, as Catherine was talking about, machine learning has taken the lion's chunk of the thinking part, but there are a number of other things into that thinking. Reasoning, problem solving, planning, simulating other people and other environment. All of that goes into the thinking bucket. And the thinking doesn't have to be just rational thinking. It can also be creative, where the computers are being very creative in how they pull various patterns together and go into certain patterns. Finally, acting. So we don't want our AIs to just recommend things. We want, in certain cases, to act. And autonomous cars being a very good example of where we want them to act. Or in very simple sense, even acting by triggering certain things in your CRM system, your customer relationship management system or sales system could also be thought of as impacting. And that manifests in manufacturing as well, so financial services or manufacturing, where you have all of the Internet of Things and sensors, and all that is connected, so you're getting that information, processing it, and acting. So that's how we think of it broadly. And then goes into the technical definition that Catherine was giving. Within sensing, you have a number of different areas of AI, like natural language processing, computer vision, and so on, machine learning, deep learning, problem solving within the thinking part. Again, robotics, the very traditional robotics, robotic process automation, all going in the acting part, supported by what we call as a foundational layer of mathematics, optimization, complexity science, operations research. All of that is a foundation for AI.
Anybody have anything to add, subtract, argue about?
I think we need to be careful of the kind of ambiguity of AI. The way we talk about it is as if somehow you visit a website one day, you buy it, it arrives in the office, people unpack it, everyone knows what it means. Like, it's almost easier to think of it as a kind of philosophical viewpoint. It's more interesting to think of it as a kind of transformative change in our relationship with data and processing. And the more that we can think more in terms of customer behavior and customer expectations and the kind of meaning of this technology, and the more that we can use this as a toolkit to do better things, the better. I think it's amazing to have a very technical definition, and you've done a superb job of that. In addition to that, I think it's sensible to think about a framework of modern behaviors and modern expectations, and then figure out how all of these different types of AI can help us in exceeding customer expectations for the future.
Along the lines of a philosophical approach, Marvin Minsky, we were chatting about earlier, thought of it as the second mind or the other mind theory. And essentially, around the age of 2, these infants have these moments of realization where they realize, in many cases, their parents or the folks closest to them have other wants and needs and thoughts. And I think we as humanity are kind of having this awakening at this moment too, that there's this technology out there now that can really offer us this great ability to accelerate, amplify, augment our thinking in many ways. So I think, when we frame it in that sense, the sky's the limit.
I do want to push back, though.
Yeah.
You mentioned Alan Turing in the beginning. So Alan Turing had his famous Turing test. So whether or not we as a person, we as people, would be able to distinguish whether or not the output of some computer was intelligent in some way or just sort of a computer. And coming from the technical side, these technologies are just math. So if we were to sort of use the technical jargon, we have a tendency to talk about them as if they're other intelligences, and it's basically just some applied math. And there's huge ramifications for what that might mean in terms of our expectations on what's really possible and what's not. And yet the math and some of the breakthroughs over the past 5 years or so on the algorithmic side are really cool and astounding. So the ability to, this term deep learning, which has been mentioned a couple of times, which is basically just layers of computing. It's math, it's linear algebra, but that's able to take data and pass it, and there's sort of like, with each layer as it goes through, it gets transformed and twisted and turned in a way where suddenly there's this representation of it in the middle that can be used for really amazing purposes. So you can sort of find a place of equilibrium between French and English, between images and text, between video and images, whatever that may be. And that's extremely powerful, but also limited in scope. So really harnessing its power requires that we understand the possibilities and the limitations so that we can deploy it effectively.
And I think it's really important for us to think practically, right? We can think about theory of mind, we can think about all these things, but when it comes down to it, what's going to matter to an enterprise is what's practical, what's the practical outcomes of using AI, and how can we take this and really make a difference, make a company more customer-centric, make a company more efficient. And we can think about these big picture AI issues, but we're thinking about general intelligence or theory of mind, and that's not really what we want to be using in the enterprise. That's not where we're at.
Let's do that, though. I want to drill down a little bit. Let's kind of explain for the audience the difference between this idea of general intelligence and maybe narrow or weak AI. Like, how would you phrase that, Catherine?
Yeah, if I'm really thinking about it, I'm thinking, when we're thinking exactly going back to sort of the Marvin era, if we're trying to build sort of an artificial version of ourselves, an artificial brain that can think about people and make really high-level decisions, how are you going to put that to work in the enterprise? We're very far from that. So really what we want to be able to do is and how AI companies succeed and how companies succeed in deploying AI is find a really great focused use case, a really great focused mission, and say, can we take, and always put business focus first. Always say, what do we need to do for our business? What do we need to do for our customers? And then try to see how can we go use AI to accomplish those goals. I don't think people want to take AI first and say we want to put AI in our business without having a reason why.
And that's a great point, is that the way AI is rolling into the enterprise now is through many narrow task-specific use cases. And so rather than it being the idea of the singularity that people like to talk about, it's really many very specific problems scaled out many times, and that's how it's finding its way into the enterprise in a useful manner today.
And I think the key thing too is to not focus on the definition of AI, because it keeps changing, and that's something that we learn over time. You know, before, not too long ago, speech recognition was a hard problem to solve, and now it's been largely solved. No one walks around thinking Siri is this cool AI breakthrough. So I think, especially when it comes to the enterprise, it's less about can we properly define AI and really what problems are we trying to solve. And it goes back to what are the key differences now between what we can do now versus some of the winters that we've seen before. And it's the computing power, it's the availability of data, and it's the advanced algorithms that have been created. And I think really focusing on what problems can you solve with that, that's really where it's at for the enterprise, much more so than kind of are we ever going to get AGI, artificial general intelligence? Are we going to have, sentient beings? There's no path for that in the research right now. And so to me, it's not even really worth talking about.
There is so though in terms of, when, as somebody working in the enterprise thinking about all of the pitches they'll hear from incoming software companies, and as representing a software company, I can be like, be skeptical of everything that I say because I'm trying to sell you something. So they'll come in and they'll promise the moon, because everybody's out there talking about how awesome artificial intelligence is, and it can do this and it can do that, and there's all these capabilities, and therefore the impression is that the tools are smarter than they are, so that they actually they're flexible, they think, right? The language that we're using to describe these tools really shapes the impression that people have when they're trying to evaluate them, because you use those words and it makes you think about the way we use them in other contexts in our lives. So they're great at narrow, specific things, and they have a lot of trouble scaling, and it's part of being practical, I think.
I mean, I think
It's not magic.
Right, it's not magic, but one of the things that's different this time, and I think one of the things we need to focus on, one of the things we should talk about, is why is now actually the time? And what's different this time is that we do have systems that can more dynamically learn. We have systems that can generalize, and we have systems that sometimes can take things they apply in one domain and use them in another domain. And these are all things that are really different from the last, as you mentioned, AI winters, the last times that, we got very excited about AI and it didn't work out.
I'm going to disagree a bit with that, because I was in one of those winters back in the late 80s. And I mean, the tools we're using today are very similar to what I used then. And I used traditional neural nets as well as genetic algorithms, and I went on to do commercial company where we did expert systems. So I've seen that whole range. What's really different is the availability of data. And that, I mean, freely to, I was out at a national laboratory, so I had access to I was doing computational chemistry work, so I had access to measurement equipment that mere mortals didn't have access to. So I had all the data that I needed, and I could do some amazing learning in that case with machine learning that's very, akin to what's happening today. But today, now, more people have access because of, ImageNet was created because there were images now available to everyone, and that's what caused some of that advancement.
So let's use
I think one of the main things that, in addition to all three that people have mentioned, I think we're missing out on the open source movement.
Right.
To me, the open source data as well as the open source algorithm is sort of accelerating what we are able to do. Just as an example, in the 80s, if I had to write a natural language processing system, I had to understand English grammar, right, to the minutest level, right? So noun phrase, verb phrase, adjective, past participle, all of those, and then go through a number of papers to understand and write a parser, which could take easily a year before I could do something. Now, it is a single line command, and you can pass the entire Library of Congress, and you have the entire grammar being spitting out at the other end, right? It's all within a matter of a few seconds.
Really
So
And
that's
you
democratizing
have
So let's I want to,
Yes.
available.
because we could do this all day. I want to, and I want to get to what's happening, like what are the interesting use cases now in the enterprise? Let's kind of bring the level to a bit more specificity. I'm going to start with you, Catherine. What are you seeing as some of the more interesting ways that enterprises are using and should be using AI?
I really see one of the sort of the gateway uses of AI being customer excellence throughout the organization, really understanding the customer, bringing those insights to bear in everything you do, from designing products to thinking through the customer lifecycle. And I think it's as companies and brands continually get used to the amount of data as customers reach out to them, being able to use that data throughout the ecosystem, we now have that power, and it can really transform things. It can really change your organization to somebody who's putting the customer first. And I think that that's really almost the gateway use case for AI.
Yeah, and
Chris?
I agree with that. And it goes back to what we talked about earlier too, is what exactly is the problem you're trying to solve, and how do we put the consumer in the center of it all,
Yeah.
right? So think about something, we'll say as simple as financial planning. But the way, if you think about, we're living longer, much longer, we're working much longer, so all of the data sets that are coming in, they're so siloed. We need good system and good design to be able to pull all these together, not just tell us where we are today, but also help us predict what we don't know, what's going to happen in the future. I think it's where it's going to be very, very interesting.
Theo, I think that fusion point is really important. And Anand, you brought up the senses.
Yep.
So much has been very focused on the vision, and we don't just use our vision in the day. We use our sense of smell and the vision and hearing and all of that. And that's where I think AI is so powerful, is not having one stream there. It's bringing all the streams together, to your point, across the enterprise to serve the customer. Let's use all of our senses about the customer, which we normally haven't. We very much siloed those senses. So how do we bring all of them together?
That's right. Yeah, it's again people understand customer centricity, but it's like one of those AI words which can mean very different things to very different people. And what's happening is exactly like what you said. Now we are moving from segments to actually individual people, right? So for each and every person, I can go in and find out the details. If it's a bank, financial planning, you have all of your assets, you have life stage, you have the entire history of you, not only of just you, but we have created a data set of every individual in US, a synthetic data set. So that's one of the other advances that's happening. So you don't need the real data. You can look at the distributions and create that data. Now, you not only have someone like you, but you can then go forward in time, right? So someone like you, but also the future you. 20 years from now, what would I be like, right? What would my finances be like, right? What would the world be like? So you can start simulating all of that. And that's the power of AI, very much going at that individual level, but then also going into the future, simulating into the future.
As we chatted about earlier, and I think we all kind of unanimously agreed, the highest order is the customer experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so coupled with now the technology is there, we've got access to these vast amounts of data, we can now create these experiences, and this notion of bringing human and machine together, not versus each other, but together, can really, I think, accelerate that creation of those customer experiences.
And we have multiple exponentials that are all occurring at the same time and feeding off each other. You have, we've been talking about data and the ability to extract more about our reality than we ever have before. The tooling is racing along as well, and so that is democratizing the availability of these technologies to a much broader user group than has ever been available for in terms of implementation. And then finally, I think I heard you mention computer a little while ago. The compute capability of modern GPUs and similar is providing us that ability to bring them all together, and they each feed off each other. So we're seeing the very early stages of this renaissance right now.
So this is a really good place for us to actually move into our next topic, which is what's happening in business and what's happening in the workplace and how is it transforming. I think you guys have done a superb job teeing everything up. Robbie, can you talk a little bit about from a ground level perspective, what are you seeing, what interesting things are happening, and then we'll get into some of the issues that we can chew over as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot that's been made around the impact of AI on the workforce, and does it mean it's going to be mass job loss? That's not what I'm seeing. I really focus on 3 areas where I think that machine learning specifically will have an impact. One is reducing cost, and by that I don't mean that we're displacing the workforce. What I mean are there's lots of jobs out there that were never intended for people to do. But the only option was for people to do them because we didn't have software that could do that on their behalf. So I think there'll be a lot of those types of jobs, repetitive, that it's not ideally suited for humans to do in the first place. Yeah. Second is increasing efficiency, and oftentimes you'll hear about potentially giving people superpowers in their job, right? Where not only can they do their job, they can do it a lot faster, a lot better, and they can be much more productive. And then the third area is achieving new breakthroughs. And this is something I think is going to be really powerful as it relates to what you can get out of machine learning. As a society, we have blind spots that we're not aware of. For any new breakthrough that occurs, that only happened because someone else didn't really think to do that. Machine learning gives us the opportunity to discover new patterns, new ways of working that weren't obvious before. And so I think we're going to be able to see all sorts of interesting new capabilities in the enterprise as it relates to that.
So let's get specific though.
He raises a great point. There's a particular word that you said, and that was kind of superpowers for humans, and I think that is where so many of us are driving toward, in that you go to your place of employment, and as you walk in, the environment and the sensors know who you are. They understand what your job is. They understand the tools that you need to do that job, and they align those robots, the various automation, and the human is really in the center of that, conducting what is essentially a symphony of automation to supercharge their ability to get their work done. And so, whereas so many people are worried about job loss, we really look at it as supercharging the human and augmenting them with better tools than they've ever had before to get their job done.
I think we really need to think about that how. You go first.
Something that's not talked about often enough, I think. We always talk about when the computer beats a human, but we don't talk about the fact that computers and humans together actually almost always beat computers alone.
Yes, true.
So it's in chess, it's in weather prediction, it's in all kinds of investing and things like this. And I wish that was a standard in the industry, that you don't just come out and say, well, we beat human radiologists at this. And you say, well, but did you do better than humans and computers together?
I don't think we think enough about the kind of how and the kind of process and the structure that companies need to have in order to operate this way.
Right.
Because most of the time whenever any new profound technology comes along, we tend to kind of apply it to existing structures and processes, and it doesn't work. So when water wheels drove the Industrial Revolution and someone invented a steam engine, the first thing they did was use it to lift up water to power the same water wheel. It took about 25 years for someone to realize quite how stupid that was. We make the same mistake every time a new technology comes along. Like, we still have not really got to grips with the power of computing. We still haven't really got to grips with the power of mobile, of cloud computing. So in this process to look at how artificial intelligence will change the way that we do our jobs, I think we need to be open to the degree to which we add it to existing processes versus completely rebuild around it. Like, at the moment, there are probably banks today figuring out how they can use image recognition to better process checks.
Absolutely.
And actually what they need to be thinking about is how do you...
1990s.
Yeah, with those
how do you completely reinvent the personal payment process so that this idea of writing an IOU note disappears into the background?
Sometimes, though, the business process change I found is derivative of the technical capability, and sometimes it's different. So I like to think about to give people an intuition that the AI instinct is to see a reasoning problem as a data problem. And there's an anecdote, and this is great, less for sort of the consumer experience and more for companies that are in professional services and thinking about applying AI for professional services tasks. Often professional services firms have a lot of text, they have a lot of unstructured, sort of messy data, because as professional services, they've been thinking and providing. Their customers need a service. They need legal advice, they need accounting advice, whatever that may be. So the type of product that's delivered has been something that requires a lot of human cognitive / reasoning capabilities. And so in trying to help people develop strong instincts for what makes a good machine learning problem or project, It's helpful to know that like one of the great things that machine learning really well is classify things. So get a couple of buckets. This goes in bucket A, this goes in bucket B. And it's important to know that there can be many buckets. So everything like image recognition, this capability that we talk about where you can show a computer a picture of a baby or a glass of wine and without needing language, it's like baby, glass of wine, whatever that may be. That's classification. It's just there's, our ability to use speech in the world is putting things into buckets. So just developing that that kind of instinct can be really important, and it can lead to things like spam classifiers or many other many other capabilities thereupon.
So let's jump into the future though for a second, because I want to make sure that we have a chance to cap this off. So on the technology and innovation side, I think we had Catherine, we had Anand, we had Chris. You guys have some predictions for where this is going. Give us a couple of predictions that you would make over the next, say, 3 to 5 years.
I think one of the boldest one was by 2020, if a company is not utilizing AI in some way, they're going to inherently lose market value. I think we were pretty confident. You and your company have done some great research on that, and I think it's pretty well substantiated.
Okay.
So yeah, the other thing is, I think the topic that we just brought up, the man plus machine would be much better than either one on their own. That's true in the enterprise world as well. I know there are a lot of AI playing games that's beating all the human champions, but I think it's just keep that to aside. So it's much more the two working together. I think is where the value would come.
Yes.
And it's not only the value, I think, as you go into more enterprise situations, given the risks involved, given the dollar value involved, you do want humans in the loop, at least for a foreseeable future, till you can start trusting the AI. And again, I like the point that Tom made. So we try to apply any new technology to our old paradigm and old mindset. So everyone thinks technology, oh yeah, this is just yet another technology. So we try to say, okay, so now just as IT, we need to have AI everywhere. But just as in technology, there's not just one computer system. You have your separate CRM system, you have your ERP system, you have a GL, general ledger system. It's still the same computer doing it, but you have built multiple things. The same way, you can't just buy one tool, one vendor tool, or one application and say, I've done AI. It is going to be very specific to understanding customers, very specific to understanding regulation that you brought up, right? So each one would be very separate. And I don't think the enterprises have quite got that. So that's one mindset. And the other mindset is software development mindset. Specify, we'll build it, we'll roll it out. AI doesn't work quite that way, right? So there is the machine learning where you need to experiment with it, and then once you have explode, you can exploit it. Not everything that you explode will be fruitful to be exploited.
That brings up a question, an idea, and that we hear quite often is where to start.
Yes.
And a great way to start is going back to this notion of human and machine and what roles do they play. And machine plays a great role as an assistant, or it could be a peer, or it could be a manager. So Adobe Creative Graph, for example, is an example of how AI, in this sense, Adobe Sensei, can be an assistant for the creative process. It's a nice way to delineate what role is the human going to play and what role is the machine going to play.
Both are possible. Human or machine could take any of them. So that's what makes it interesting.
I'm sorry, Catherine, I'll totally get to you in 1 second. In fact, maybe you can answer this question. It's from the audience. And the question is, what is one argument you would make to convince a CEO of the use of AI for a B2B instead of a B2C enterprise? Oh. So
you can shift around your pricing structure. So example, I did some work on shifting around. This was a B2B professional services firm who gave tax advice. And they, in the past, it was so hard to do the research to figure out exactly to go from the regulation and the law to that which is specific to the client, that they had these little provisions and like the fine print at the end of the deliverable that said, this advice is relevant today. If you would like it to be updated in the future, come back and we'll reprice everything. So a time and materials business model. Using AI, we were able to go from the human coming in and figuring out what type of specific advice to give to the client, to something where the computer was able to sift through all the regulation and make suggestions on what might be relevant. Note, not so smart that it could actually provide the advice. You needed the human to do that, but it made the search time and the research time so much faster, just like we think about with computational availability, that they could then shift around their business pricing model and go from a one-time time and materials-based fee, standard sort of consulting, to a dynamic subscription-based model. So different business thing, made more money, drove efficiencies, hired new people, and that's so I think in terms of making an agreement to the CEO, it's got to be based upon what are their P&L needs, not, hey, this is cool, let's do it, everybody needs an AI strategy, but like, what's the metric you're trying to track, what's the strategy, how do we get there? And this one was one where it led to an evident revenue boost. So if you tie it into whatever the real business stuff of the firm is, then work backwards to figure out what the capability might be to change that. I found that to be exciting. I mean, it was real transformation.
And I think that really ties into sort of our third conclusion that we came up with, which was about general versus specific. And if we're looking at something like a B2B situation, and we're looking at image recognition, right? And I think there's this tendency to take these big general systems that have been built to sell more ads and things like that and try to use them for a lot of business problems where they aren't really doing that. The analogy we came up with is Swiss Army knife versus a surgeon's knife. And in a B2B situation, a lot of people are looking at using image recognition for doing industrial safety and that kind of stuff. And if you're using something that was made to sell ads, you're doing something that's really great at finding a cat and really bad at finding a crack, right? And so you need to be able to build systems and build tools and personalize these systems for particular brands and enterprises. And I think that's something that people don't really get yet, right? You can't be using these big general ad selling systems to be doing something like routing for a bank or finding cracks in pipes, right? You need something that's very specialized.
I think that's a really important insight because, since you didn't name it, I'm going to go ahead and name it, that, Cambridge Analytica and Facebook have been on everybody's minds over the past several weeks and months. And, I think one of the questions I have is the degree to which it's good news that some of these issues have been raised, and we're going to talk about this in the third section, a bit about sort of the implication stuff. But one of the things I think is somewhat problematic is that when you look at Facebook as a business, it's a very particular kind of business. It's not B2B enterprise, it's not even B2C enterprise. And so maybe we can take some lessons from that, maybe we can't, but I think the very important piece is, this is not a Swiss Army knife scenario. Unless you could actually take different blades off the Swiss Army knife and put different things on the Swiss Army knife for healthcare or for financial services or whatnot.
Yeah. That draws out a point that you really have to assess the problem that you're trying to solve, that you have the right tools to solve that. And we tend to lump it all into AI. But there are many different options on solving a particular problem, and in some cases you may have multiple options that work well and multiple options that don't. And having that assessment in the beginning where you are making sure that you are picking up the right tool to solve the problem that you're trying to solve has a big impact on whether you're going to be successful or not.
I would say there's often not just one tool too. You need to come at it from different perspectives. So even the same data, and we do that with our customers all the time, is we'll scan through the same data with multiple perspectives, and then we fuse those perspectives together to give, and we do that as humans.
Yeah, it's not just multiple perspective, multiple techniques as well. So what is well known in the data science community is if you just build one model, you're likely to be very biased and one-tracked. Now, if you build multiple models with different techniques and then take some kind of what they call as ensemble model, it is much better. Yeah. Just as when we, as people, we crowdsource amongst experts, then the value of that crowdsourced idea is much better than any one person could come up with. So that
of different models there is crucial to success, because otherwise you never really know what you can do.
Yeah.
And the ensemble approach is definitely something that we've looked at and found success with.
Okay, so I'm a senior executive in a B2B enterprise. Where do I start? What do I do, Tom?
You probably define the problem. There's two ways to innovate.
Help me figure out what a problem is. tell me about a problem.
Right now? Well, I think broadly speaking, there's two ways to use a new technology. The easiest and the most effective way to do that is to work around a problem. The other way is to work around the opportunities it creates. So regardless of what business you're in, it's great to figure out what the points of pain are, and then establish if this technology has a role in that. and then what that role is, and then ideate around that. The other way is to just be aware of the incredible things that this can make happen, and then kind of brainstorm around what that means. But we need to be really careful about very specific advice to very general problems. We like to ask people questions like, what are your clients thinking these days? Or what's it like to be a bank? The reality is that every type of company has completely different problems right now. They have vastly different attitudes towards risk. They have vastly different attitudes towards the degree to which they're trying to and able to make change. So I think you need to just approach every single particular problem and opportunity in a very specific way that's precise to that person and that time.
Well,
I think
we
it's
often
important. I think it's important to keep expectations set too, right? Like people hear about artificial intelligence and all this crazy stuff that it's doing, and so they think that it's going to be this magical solution that solves all their problems. When, in most cases, in my experience, it's better to walk before you run when it comes to this, especially if you've never done a machine learning style project before, which requires a significant amount of data. You first have to get your data strategy in place before you can have an AI strategy.
We're in a very strong time.
Crucial.
That is crucial to success. If you do not get your data strategy not only figured out, but implemented ahead of time, and you may have a huge amount of data, but getting the right data to the right place to solve a problem it cannot be overstated.
So
What I would add as a caution there, sorry, is
We have a winner, people.
if you spend too long a time getting your data strategy right, you'll never get it right.
That's
You don't even know what the strategy
with the
is
problem,
until-
right?
Yeah, for
So, and the other way we would like to tackle is, you ask the senior executive the problem. The other way is every executive has 3, maybe 5 metrics that they're responsible for.
Yes.
I'm sure not everything is going fine. We say, pick your worst metric. Let's see how we can improve it, right? And it may be partly AI, it may not even be AI. So why worry about AI?
Right,
You're worried about your metric.
Right.
Let me improve your metric. Some of it will be AI, some of it will be very regular stuff.
We have one question that has worked well with customers, which is, what problem have you been working on that you haven't been able to solve?
Yeah.
And working on means it's important to them, because if it's not important to them, they get bored with it and they haven't worked on it. It means that they've tried to pull together some data, they've thought about data. They may not have a strategy, which is what I'm uncomfortable with because they don't quite know, but they've thought about the data around it. They've thought about how it might fit into their culture or things like that. So I agree with you on it's hard to say one thing for anyone, but I will say that one question has helped.
And you need to have a strategy for what happens if you succeed, right? I think that's super important, right? You go out, you do a POC, you do a test, and it works. You should have a plan for how to roll it out inside your organization, how to take the next action. And I think that becomes incredibly important.
There's also this component of experimentation that's embedded into AI solutions that we were chatting about earlier, and it's a mindset. So even if you have, the infrastructures, the data de-siloed and everything in place, the talent as well, there's the methodology and the mindset to kind of accomplish.
You need a learning-oriented organization.
Yes.
Well, it's a mindset.
recognizes.
Also a culture change, right? So we talked a little bit earlier about digital transformation. What does that mean, right? You putting lipstick on a pig, you just give them a mobile app and say, here you go, we're digital. But the fundamentals of it, the processes behind it, the talent, all of that, it needs to go along with it.
Okay, but we're back to the chicken and the egg, right?
It is the chicken and egg.
Because the chicken is digital transformation, and the egg is the proof of concept, and you've got to start a proof of concept in order to get along the way to digital transformation. But you also have to commit to digital transformation before the proof of concept is anything other than just some dumb project that you know.
I'd say there's probably 2 ways to approach this. I think you either have this kind of incremental test and learn, small scale project base where you find specific and small challenges and you kind of iterate around the solution and you use that to kind of inform the rest of your strategy, or you kind of have a kind of go big or go home strategy where you decide to completely create a new entity with something like artificial intelligence at the core. But I think the question then becomes, when's the time to do that? Like what sort of structures, what kind of technologies do you kind of base this reconstruction of your whole company around? And is that commercially viable? But we see a lot of kind of halfway houses. We see a lot of airlines that are not embracing digital transformation enough to completely rethink their whole booking flow, but they have a very sort of glamorous looking app. Or we have hotel chains that have one branch in San Jose where you can use Apple Watches to check in, but the rest of the hotels are kind of slowly crumbling apart. But I think every company needs to kind of figure out, are they doing these small bets to learn, or are they doing something big to really win in the future? But something between the two is quite dangerous.
Some of that might be actually driven by the market and the industry.
Yeah.
A great example is auto industry, right? So you had a few of the tech companies, and you have all the sort of the big auto companies 5 years back. These guys used to work on autonomous vehicles. These guys dismissed it as outright impossible. And now you have every one of them working very much on their traditional auto business, but then they all have an autonomous vehicle, right? So they just can't ignore it. And same thing we see happening in the retail industry with some of the big players like Amazon coming in. Everyone else is saying, hey, how do we essentially re-engineer? Sometimes it's transformative, otherwise it has to be disruptive. So if you don't do it yourself, someone else will force you to do it.
So Amazon is an interesting example because you look at how they started. It was e-commerce. It was selling books, right? They were putting everything on digital. But the last few years, they started experimenting with stores.
Yes.
Amazon Books, Amazon Go. It's almost, I wonder if they got to a point where they realized machines are nice, digital is nice, but you can't remove the human from the experience. We're still very much like in-person experience. There's the touch that is missing. And so what I found intriguing with technology, transformation, AI, and all of that is we tend to swing really far to the other side of the pendulum, and then we come back and say, oh, wait a minute. People still want bank branches, maybe a slightly different version of it. People still like mobile experience. We still like voice experience. So the trick of it is, how do we provide a good experience across all of it without forgetting about the consumer?
Yeah, I think, what's interesting to me about that too, Theo, is I'm thinking about Netflix in the early days.
Yeah.
And, I think there's an old probably, apocryphal story about, if our goal was to just send you DVDs, then we would have called ourselves DVDs by mail, right? And you could never have imagined at the beginning of Netflix that it would be what it is today. You could never have imagined what would have happened with Blockbuster. You could never have imagined what would have happened with Amazon. At the same time, those organizations have massive, massive technology resources, and not every enterprise does. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what your sort of Fortune 5,000 or Global 2,000 companies should be doing. What does that look like? And then I'd like to get to everybody's predictions for this section too. So who wants to jump?
Most of those Fortune 5,000 companies don't need to hire the PhDs out of the top schools in AI, because there's so much, and you brought it up, there's so much out there and available today that's good quality, and what they need to focus on is what data does their organization have? What's the quality of the data? How does that data apply to the problem? So, Jeff Dean was recently asked at a conference, can mere mortal companies do AI? And he, from Google said emphatically yes. They have enough data. There's enough tools out there and frameworks that mere mortal companies can use this. And so what I'd say is get started. Just get out there, talk to people. Don't go into it blindly. Don't do the same thing that you used to do. Go find experts. Listen to things like the think tank that Adobe does, and start learning, and then start getting into it.
Yeah, there really is no silver bullet. It's hard to say, because I'd love to be able to have an answer. I'm sure everybody here would love to be like, all right, first you do this and then you do this. But I think a combination of what everybody's saying definitely resonates with me. So I've seen a lot of enterprises fail when they feel like they first need to do their EDL, Enterprise Data Lake project.
Oh, yep.
So they focus first on getting the data foundation in order, because they know that they need to have great training data and great this in order to succeed with AI. And one of the people's anecdotes I always turn to is my friend Daniel Tunkalong, who used to lead data science for LinkedIn. And his advice to enterprise, you think LinkedIn, right? It's like one of these data first, digital first companies, like great data science practice, actually really great privacy protecting practices as well, even post Microsoft acquisition. So he'd always say, like, look, our data was a mess. And a lot of one of the most difficult cultural change management transitions enterprises deal with is that data historically has been under the office of the CFO. And the CFO is in the business of counting things accurately. And therefore the instinct that people have, they want to say, oh my God, data is an oracle. This is where like we stupid humans have our subjective biases and all these things are right. And then basically somebody will do a query and the other person will do a query and they get a different answer and they're like, their foundations feel shaken because they're like, oh my God, the data quality can't be good. And then they pitch it back to the engineers and the data engineering department and nothing happens. So there's sort of this comfort that's like, these systems output probabilistic predictions. It's always a level of uncertainty. It's always kind of messy. And getting used to sort of grime and grit and mess is one of the first cultural instincts that enterprises need to get started. And then the second, I really like what Anand said, what businesses do know, because they all are doing this, is what metrics the P&L holders are accountable for.
Yes.
And you go through and you say, okay, I want to move this, and it's not going to be Jeff Bezos writes the best letters to shareholders ever. This year's one is as good as always, and it talks about, if there's the wrong, what leads to high quality or high performing organizations is good expectation setting. So you can't learn to do a handstand without the wall in 2 weeks. It takes 6 months of practicing every day. And similarly, it takes like a long time to really get the results from an experiment with AI. So sort of like, all right, we've got our metric, we want to move it by not 38%, but like 2%. And we're going to do a series of experiments. We're going to accept that we want to constrain the focus so that we don't alienate our customers. And we're going to get going and we'll be like, whoa, we're moving. And eventually it can lead to, that compounded impact, especially at the scale of a large enterprise, can lead to really cool returns.
There's that old saying, if you want to make a pie, first you have to make the universe. So I think that's kind of what we're chatting about here, is that
nice.
We have to get everything kind of situated and created.
That's also beautiful.
And for the
pies are good.
For the Chris's, since you're both enterprise guys yourselves, like what is that first, what is, I don't know, a sense of that conversation? Because now we're moving from the sort of rules-based world to the probabilistic world, and if we think about the internet, the kind of history of the internet compared to where we are with AI, we're kind of like in 1993, where you're just like, things are just starting to happen and there are lots of big, hypey, predictions being made and then like little projects happening. So what is the expectation setting that you guys do?
Yeah.
I think with our team at Honeywell, we're really focused on the practical and the pragmatic. We treat it like a fusion of software development and data science in terms of the skills that are needed to deploy. But we break it down in a lot of ways very similar to traditional software development projects, where we're actually saying, what do we need to get a particular task done? Where's our data? Which tools in our toolbox do we need to apply? And then we orchestrate the project that way. And I think you have to do it that way to be successful, and you have to keep the scope reasonable and small so that expectations are set on something that is realistic. You can bite that off. You can you learn your way into the right solution, and as has been pointed out by several people, the first time you try, you may not be successful. It may take several times, and I like to tell people on my team, be a weeple. Remember weeples? Weeples wobble, but they don't fall down. And that is, you get knocked around a little bit as you try to find that right solution, but eventually you find it and you go forward. In the startup world, they'd say, you hit the wall and you fall down and you fail fast and you pop up and you hit another wall and you fall down. But after you do that a few times, you're learning from those bruises and you move forward into a good path. And that kind of simple, practical, let's keep it real approach is the key for any shop. It doesn't have to be a Honeywell. It can be a startup with 4 people in it to actually get productive with these technologies quickly.
Yeah, I agree. I think it goes back to our earlier discussion that it's all about the customer experience, and then you can start with either a business problem, an unused data set, or a data set that you have, and you go from there. And I think then you go to the end with the ROIs, having clear measurement in place, and I think you have a recipe for success. Now there's a lot of touch points within that have to get defined, and I think that's there's no one size fits all for across the business world.
Yeah. The other thing we're noticing is that when we talk about talent, we typically talk about AI or data science talent. And that to me is just one part of a 3-legged stool. I would start with almost every employee understanding what really is AI. What is the hype? What is the reality of AI? That's a sort of across the board education. Just as people understand computing technology or internet, they need to understand what is this thing called AI. That's broad brush. Then I think you need a much smaller group of people who can recognize the different tools in the Swiss Army knife to be able to say, oh, this problem sort of looks like I could get someone from my data science team to look at it in natural language processing or machine learning. So people who can identify or match problems with, hey, I need to go to the data science folks to get this solved. And then, of course, you have a hardcore of, again, very small group of people. You don't need PhDs, you don't need hundreds of data scientists. You could literally do with a small, but you need the other two so that you don't go on the wrong track.
And you just don't let people watch Westworld, basically. So I want to sum up this section by getting the predictions from the business and workplace experts. That would be Jana, Robbie, and Theo. What did you guys come up with over lunch that you thought was worth sharing with everybody?
So I could take the first stab at it. One that I think is maybe not something that most enterprises are expecting, but I've seen it happen time and time again, and that's it's likely that companies will spend just as much money on getting data out of their systems as they did to implement the systems to begin with. And what I mean by that are ERP, CRMs, all their databases. To get the data out of it in a format that's useful for machine learning algorithms and other things is a non-trivial task. And it turns out to be, in most cases, the long pole in the tent. That is the hardest aspect of actually implementing a project, is just to get the data. So that's why we were talking about before data strategy, when do you get it? It's going to be difficult to do much in this space in the enterprise unless you have access to data in a format that makes it available to somebody to use in terms of implementing algorithms.
Yeah, the silo of the data, right? It's not so much that data is not there. It's a matter of being able to collate them to make sense out of it, analyze it. And then I think the only other interesting part that we also talked about, we touched on, is talent and future of work. Like what Jenna, believes in. Not every company needs to go out and hire a bunch of data scientists and PhDs and whatnot. The people that knows the company best are the ones that have been working there. Right? They know it inside out. They know what their consumers are looking for. They know what the customers are looking for. Leverage them, use them, retrain them, right?
Complement them.
And complement them with machines. Yeah.
So that feeds into a question actually that came from Twitter, which is, what will jobs look like 5 or 10 years from now based on the influence of AI? So I just gave you actually whoever it was. Thank you.
Thank you.
You gave Jana a layout.
Actually, we had a very interesting discussion about that because we said we can't predict it. And that's part of AI, and you've heard it from all of these experts here. No one said, oh, it's going to look like this. They said, oh, we're going to have to run into this wall and that wall, and we're going to continue to do that. And so what we said is, for the future of work, what we really need to do is be able to teach ourselves to be agile to that, to pick ourselves up, fall 8 times, get up 9, or whatever the proverb is.
Yeah, and definitely get up more times than you fall, right?
Yes, yes.
And also for children too, right? We talked about, what does future of work mean, not just for the current workforce, but also for the future generations. It's something we can't predict. We don't know how it's going to be like, but what we do know is that we need to make sure we equip the kids with emotional intelligence, creativity, because codes can be done, you can be written, machines can probably take some of that over, but understanding humanity, understanding how humans work, that's still pretty much something we need to do.
So that's a beautiful transition into our third theme, which is about the societal impact of AI and the macroeconomic impact of AI. And we have not been able to get off this topic, and I'm really proud of us that we managed to focus on 2 topics first. But I do want to talk about it because there are a lot of scary stories in the news. There's scary stories, and cybersecurity related, but also stories about the way that sometimes algorithms can encode bias. They can encode bias in language. They can and sort of amplify that bias. And Catherine, I'd love to hear from you on that. They can also they can also sort of misunderstand things. Context is critically important. And then the way that they're used can sometimes disenfranchise people. And if you're in an enterprise context, that could maybe be like you've now messed up your audience segmentation or your recommendation engine or your ad targeting or something like that. Or it can be now you've actually disenfranchised people by denying a whole group of people a loan, or by not having a system that understands how they speak. Or by not designing inclusive enough systems that people with disabilities or other kinds of design requirements can interact. So I'm just going to throw it out, but maybe Catherine, you can give us a start on that.
Also giving me a chance to start with an easy question. But
Yes, I know. I know. There are no easy questions.
That was a fantastic intro, and I think that was a real intro to the problem. When we talked earlier about sort of the Swiss Army knife versus the individual, we look at these big systems that have learned from everything, and they've learned from the web, which means they've read the good of the web and the bad of the web. And so if you go out there, you sort of get introduced to this kind of thing if you're not thinking about it through just practical stuff. If you're looking at a system that's doing restaurant recommendations, is it likely to recommend certain ethnicities of restaurants more than others? And if you see that, you go in and you look at the data and you understand that there's a problem with that, right? And there's a reason why that's happening. And it's because it's looking at the web and it's learning these biases. You know, one of these big monolithic, pretty much every one of these big monolithic domain general AI systems out there have biases encoded in them that come from the web. And even the big tech companies are only just starting to try to figure out how can we fix this, how can we bring it in, you know. There are systems out there that are more likely to say, you know, men are programmers and women are homemakers. And they bring those biases to the table, and when you use them, they you know, bring that into the process that you're using them for.
Can you explain a little bit, because I know that paper.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit about how that happens?
Right. So how that happens is it happens because it's reading the web, and it's looking at the information that we put out there and the connections that we make between things. And if you're training a large deep learning system, you need a lot of data. And you're either going to be using something like, if you're an enterprise, it's good to use something like transfer learning to move that data into a specific domain. But when you're training something for the base model, you need to bring a lot of that data in from the web. And so it's going to be looking at literally everything it can find. And if it does that, it's going to find all of the stuff you don't want your kids to read on the web, and it's going to read that and internalize those links.
And it doesn't have a way of knowing what's more or less
I think
important.
it's something that our viewers can try. Just go into any of your favorite search, go into images, and just type in nurse, see what gender pictures come up, type in doctor, and see what kinds of gender pictures come up.
Well, I think it's important though, because I feel like, you know, not to be on the side of the computers in this situation, but algorithms are neutral, right? They start from neutral. They don't come, you know, it almost feels like the perception is that, you know, machine learning can just, you know, be negative, or it can just automatically encompass these bias on its own. Guess where it's getting the bias from?
Oh yeah.
Us. Right? It's like it's essentially codifying our own biases, or at least the ones we're even aware of, right? Bias is just something that we're knowledgeable of. There still could be other biases that we're not even aware of are going on.
Oh yeah.
So just wanted to point that out. It's not
just codifying them, it's amplifying.
But it's not to say that we shouldn't do anything about it, but it's also something that I don't think this is, again, any different than what we code biases in software even before artificial intelligence.
I think it's different insofar as there's been a lot of, so we talked about having a sociologist on the panel. There's been passive statistical analysis of injustices in society for a really long time. But Janet just used the word amplify. That changes a little bit when we start to go from a statistical analysis of some trend to show that African Americans are receiving some sort of unfair and disproportionate treatment than, say, I don't know, white Caucasian males or whatever. And it shifts when that then becomes encoded in a system that then acts. And there's a feedback loop where whatever that output is, let's go back to the example of representation. So women should be homemakers, men should be computer programmers. I was thinking about this as sort of the time warp impact of these technologies, where we have this actually false impression that our society has in some way, well, sometimes accurate perception that society has progressed upon certain social norms, et cetera, that we didn't have 50 years ago or so. But because we do need so much more training data in order to get these systems going, we'll have to dip back into the past. We can't just train it on last week's news. It needs to go 50 years back. And lo and behold, we end up recovering re-identifying some of the past social norms that we've sort of progressed beyond, but then we project those into the future. So it was interesting when I refrained from comment in the discussion in the first half hour and thinking about the future-oriented notion of AI. We think about this as like the things we can't do yet, but it may indeed be one of the most conservative technologies out there if we're not careful. However, in terms of the if we're not careful, we also have this amazing opportunity to grapple with these biases, because the algorithms are neutral, but they're this wonderful quantitative mirror into what actually exists today. So we might, there's an excellent article by Jonathan Zunger on a Medium called Asking the Right Questions About AI, where he so eloquently says that AIs don't tell polite fictions. Politicians do. I'm not sure that in the States today politicians do like they used to. They sell different types of fictions, but most of us, the glue of our society does indeed rest often upon polite fictions. And often these tools reveal all of the things that lie beneath some of the social tissue and glue. And that can be an amazing opportunity for business people to come in and think about the values that their companies espouse, because we have the choice to analyze where there might be biases after we built a system and then go through and say, no, I don't want that outcome. And it leads to an interesting paradox for the technologist, because, and this is coming from the fairness community that I work in the machine learning community, where most technologists, as a data scientist, they're trying to optimize for the accuracy of their algorithm. So get it as good as possible at doing what we want it to do. But often in these social questions, accurate is not fair, is not what we want. We don't want, an accurate thing might be, hire that white guy because he looks like everybody else we used to hire. And then you might say, but no, but we don't want that. So pitch it different, and it shifts around what we look for in the tools, but I think it's really cool because we're empowered to change things.
I'm going to be honest here, which is that once we started doing debiasing on our models, our accuracy went up, actually, for customer service. When we've debiased some of the customer service work we've done, and we've looked at, so these big, we have an ensemble system as our base model, and then we do transfer learning. You debias the base model, right? And once you do that, you realize your accuracy goes up for the end task.
It's cool.
Which is cool.
I've seen it also go down, and then you have to make a risk-oriented trade-off regarding what you want to optimize.
But you don't assume that it's going to make your accuracy go down.
For sure,
It doesn't happen all the time.
There's a notion here that I wanted to draw out, and that is, before we were doing AI and we were doing explicit programming, and kind of if this then that, and we would go to our customers and try to understand their problems, and programmers would try to understand what the reality is that we were trying to code against. In this era of AI, we've been talking about all the data that we need, the big data that we need to do that. Data itself is now the proxy for reality. And what we're seeing here is with these tools, sometimes those fictions that you're talking about that allowed us to live comfortably in our lives, the reality that we are seeing in our data is something that we're having to face for the first time, because there's no barriers between us and that data. And it's very important to recognize that as we take the next few steps forward, because these biases will continue. We're producing ever more quantities of data on exponentially at this point. And so the problem of bias is only going to grow in the years ahead. The notion of proxies is, for me, honestly, the key ethics question for an enterprise, because...
Unpack it a little bit, though.
Yeah, for sure, yeah. So I have my definition, and when I think about, there's a couple of things in AI, in machine learning, supervised and unsupervised learning, and my definition of supervised learning is basically, there's something you want to know about the world that's kind of hard, where hard means hard to measure. It's fuzzy, and you want to find something that's easier to measure, that's a good proxy for that hard to know thing. However, because you're losing information there, you're simplifying something to make it tractable, even in AI, and sometimes the gap between the messy thing that is the world and the simplified version can be dangerous. So example, there's an article by ProPublica, the investigative journalists, about an algorithm that's been used for recidivism prediction algorithm. So if somebody is given a sentence, what is the likelihood that they will commit a crime again? And all of this is to help judges that are determining somebody's life, right? How long they'll spend in jail, determine the right length of sentence. And that's actually a really, really, really hard thing to measure. Because say we say this person should be in jail for 5 years, and then they get out, and then the question is, did they commit another crime? Maybe they did, they just didn't get caught. Say they live in the Bronx, there's more policemen there, so the likelihood somebody in the Bronx gets caught is much higher than somebody living in the East Village or whatever that may be. These data collection issues are the part are the stuff. Yeah, exactly. So what these systems actually measure is the likelihood that somebody will be convicted. That's really different, especially given the fact that African American males tend to be convicted much more frequently, right? So this is what this thing is telling us, and we have to be, I see this in all sorts of things in terms of business processes. So going back to the enterprise, like, super important that you map out just where customers touch and like what a process looks like, so that you know what your proxy is actually going to get good at optimizing for, because it might be different than what you think it's doing.
This also brings up the notion of, can AI be empathetic? And I think there's probably debate from a technical standpoint if you can program AI emotions. Tide of Minds kind of makes the case that one of the big things that we haven't recognized in the AI community is infusing emotion into AI. But empathy, right? I think we all can agree that the output of AI can deliver and provide solutions that are empathetic.
It's our job to be empathetic to the populations we want to support.
Exactly. I heard a great example from somebody at DBS, a bank in Singapore, about like when you lose your credit card, chances are it's because your wallet was stolen or your purse was stolen. And so infusing empathy into that interaction is simply acknowledging that this is a stressful time. It doesn't mean a sort of like huge touchy-feely, tell me how you feel business, but it's about making that interaction comforting and efficient. And I think, when we talk about empathy, they're kind of different levels.
I think empathy and creativity are probably going to be our kind of tools for the future.
Yeah.
I think as we kind of look ahead and we look at the role of AI, as we look at the types of roles that it may embellish, the types of roles it may get rid of, we then need to kind of focus on the future of education. So for kids today going through a formal education environment, how are they best equipped for this future that we don't really understand? The reality is that technology for most of our life has been like a lever to manual work. And when those jobs were eliminated, not that many people had problems. Like, no one looks at a horse and thinks, if only a human could do this. As artificial intelligence becomes a lever to our mind and our thought, and our very kind of core human purpose, then we enter a very different environment where outsourcing thinking and meaning to a computer has real philosophical issues. So we then need to think, right, how do we embellish those jobs? How do we augment those jobs? And probably the way to do that will be creativity, it will be relationship building, it will be empathy. And I think that's a really interesting thing that not many formal education environments are talking about at the moment.
The other thing that's also happening in some of the work that we have done, we focus quite a lot on unemployment and the efficiency gain. But that, according to our calculations, by 2030, it's only 40% of the total contribution of AI. 60% is going to come from increased consumption. How increased consumption? Because we are going to, with every digitization, we are going to have lots of data. One route is to actually automate, right? So as you have more data, you standardize, you simplify, and then you automate. That's efficiency. You have another path with lots of data, you personalized. When you personalize, the customer experience gets enhanced. And with the enhanced customer experience, people buy more. Great example is the video consumption, right? Between, if you take from 2000 to now, so Netflix, Blockbuster to now, it is completely transformed. So there's so much more consumption and novel ways of consuming it. So no one watches, it's not just movie watching for 90 minutes, it's watching 3-minute clips or webcasts like what we are doing now, right? So it's completely changed. And that's what we see happening in the B2B world as well. So again, that'll lead to more traditional jobs, but then it'll also lead to this, we see sort of two kinds. One is sort of heavily technical, and the other one heavily people-oriented. People want to talk with people, or people want other people performing in a basketball game or a NFL. So that's what people would want to do, right?
So that's a really good segue, actually, because we do need to talk a little bit about data and privacy. Yeah, we're about 26 days out from some major legislation some major regulation that will become effective in the EU, the Global Data Protection Regulations, or GDPR. Which is really going to change the way that a lot of companies can use data and will use data. There's a great question from the audience around the ability to anonymize user data and use that kind of as strategically as more personal data. Is that really a possibility? And how can we achieve that and still get the benefit of personalization. So I'm curious to hear what you folks think about that.
The short answer is it's quite easy to anonymize it. I think it's interesting to look at how new we are in this current environment. Like, we talk about these issues as if we've been using Facebook for 50 years, as if kids
Feels
have
like
grown
it.
up. Yeah, it feels like it. Some days. We talk about it as if we've had smartphones for 60 years. Like, the reality is all this stuff is brand new. Like, we don't know what kind of digital etiquette is. We don't know how to communicate with each other properly. We don't know how to do dating in the modern era. Like, all these rules are being written. And so far, most conversations to do with data have been based on the assumption that this is a beast that we don't want to wake up. So companies pretend to have less than they do. Companies kind of depersonalize what they could do based either on legal issues or moral issues or what they think is the polite way to behave. I've just written a book all about the kind of future of technology and how that will change companies. And a big thing to think about is, how do we start a different conversation? How do we give people reassurance that we're using their data for the right things? How do we look after it unbelievably securely? How do we make sure we store it in a way which is not hackable? But above all else, how do we maximize the value that people get in return for it? Like, people today have grown up like sharing their most intimate thoughts on Twitter. They broadcast their most intimate pictures on Instagram. This idea that people grow up with an expectation of privacy, I think, is quite naive. Instead, if we think about how can we make, boarding a plane a better experience, how can we make sure that we check people into hotels without them thinking, how do we never deny a credit card transaction because we know where people are? When we think about this notion of privacy trading and what we can give in exchange, I think we get a much more expansive and progressive conversation.
Ooh, I think this is a big, thorny, hairy, tough issue.
It
and
is.
I think that the GDPR changes that are coming into play, there's certain provisions there within, namely the right that a consumer has to have an explanation as to why a system gave them the product or denied them. I think more importantly, the product that they did. These have ramifications on the type of values that can be learned. Not always sure it's a good thing. When it comes to anonymization, my opinion is that the machine learning world is starting to topple some of our traditional enterprise expectations and processes for managing privacy. So when it's the data point that matters, there's things like identifying protected health information, personally identifiable information, stripping it from the data set, using some techniques to de-identify some data set. The problem with ML is that, or using data, is that when you bring in multiple data sets, it becomes possible to mix and match and basically prune until the point where, even though you've stripped away somebody's name, somebody's email address, somebody's whatever that identifier may be, you can still find them. And so in this new world, the irony is that the more data you have, the more private the data set becomes. And the reason is that when you've got a sort of a distribution, if I become a needle in a haystack, it's harder to find me. It's harder to identify me. And there's new techniques. The biggest one is called differential privacy, which are very mathematically robust techniques for protecting an individual when that individual lies within a big data set, so that we can get the benefit from these algorithms, but still protect the individuals. And it's they're still sort of on the cusp of becoming commercially viable, some of these new stats and different like privacy and security techniques, but they really, I think there's a need to invest in it heavily within the research community. We don't see as much of it as we'd like, but it's starting to take off as it hits all of the compliance, governance, and then consumer trust trappings of the enterprise. And they're thorny big issues, and I just hope that a lot of people are going to be moving in this direction.
Yeah, the other
Related
way in
issue
which you
that,
can get around this is also, I think, anonymizing data sets. There are a lot of people doing it. But what you find that if you want data for machine learning, depends on the purpose of what you're putting this data to, you can start synthesizing data. The synthetic data set, I think, is sort of emerging as a discipline on its own, whether it's image data or even structured data. All you want is the distribution of age versus income. location versus income or net worth. So you want the distribution. You're not interested in a specific person. So you can start synthesizing all of that data. And that also plays into how you can unbias the data, because you're creating a synthetic data set. And if you don't want it biased along one particular dimension, you can do that mathematically. So that also, I think, would start helping a lot.
A related issue that I think is going to play out, there's a lot that's been made over the war for talent and which country is going to win. It's almost like we're competing right at some country level. But I think potentially a bigger issue are how are the countries treating data privacy and regulations. So on one end of the spectrum, you have countries that are very open about making their data available, and on the other end you have GDPR. The U.S. is maybe somewhere in between. I have firsthand experience working with countries that are very open with data. You can do a lot more, and you can get a lot more done with machine learning and artificial intelligence than you can in Europe, right? In fact, as an entrepreneur, I'm nervous about working in Europe after some of the regulations that are being put in place, right? So that's going to necessarily prohibit the type of innovation that you see in those countries. Versus on the other end of the spectrum, you'll see all sorts of crazy innovations just because they have access to the data.
Yep. You look at the payments platform, right? For example, in China, you look at what the big tech Tencent can do. It's a ginormous platform that have so many different functions, but yet from a consumer perspective, they get so much value out from it. And there's a fine line between what you're willing to give up versus what you're going to get back.
A very good example, just in today's news, in China, there was a game that was going on, 60,000 people in the auditorium. They did image analysis to identify one felon who was essentially 100 miles from his location. Yes. They were able to identify him, but as he was going, they nabbed him. Now, it's great, but would we allow that here in this society for someone just watching a game to capture it? Right?
So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we hit our predictions for this section. Chris Benson, Tom, and Catherine Hume, I'd love to hear kind of what you cooked up in your lunchtime discussion.
For me, I'd say the number one thing is we prepare for an era of uncertainty. I think for years we've been going around saying things are changing faster than ever, and it's been the pace of change which has been the hardest thing for people to deal with. I actually think now it's the degree of uncertainty. The reality is that more than any other time ever before, we just have no idea how things are going to go. We have no idea if AI is going to run away and create this entire world of transhumanism and another consciousness. We have no idea if we're going to kind of rebel against it.
We just decide it won't. Can we just actually make a pact right now with everybody on the live stream?
But on the other end of this game, maybe we're going to become sort of neo-Luddites, and we're going to sort of throw away our smartphones and ensure that no one can track our location, and we're going to stop using Google Maps because we hate our data being aggregated that way. The reality is the standard deviation for the prediction of the world has probably never been greater than before, and therefore it's essential within all of us that we prepare for a future where we're going to have to change. Our careers will change, the value we add will change, the meaning of our lives will change, and that's something we fundamentally need to prepare for.
But to echo Tim O'Reilly's book, we're in control. We can make the determination what happens, right?
Yeah, sure.
Well, Tim also said, who's run out of work? I mean, when we, and that's one of the things that I tell people is, how many of you finish your work in a day? Right? So don't you want technology to help you so that you get some more done? And it's the same with, and Tim says this often, which is, I don't worry that we'll run out of jobs. We've just got to get to where we can transform.
The big question that goes back to uncertainty is there's a lot of this time it's the same, and we've seen this before, whether it's the Luddites, whether it's the advent of computers, whether it's the paperless office. We end up making pretty lousy predictions, and actually things remain much more similar than we ever thought before. But there is a kind of lingering feeling that there are logical reasons to think that this time is different. So.
But you think that every time, though. Every time we think that.
I mean, what it really comes down to is that we've all agreed that you can't predict the future. The world is changing ever more, and that is only accelerating. And so there comes a point where you have to accept that there's only so far into tomorrow that we can see, and you need to start organizing yourself around that. And so we talked a bit about education earlier, and I was commenting, I have a daughter, Athena, who's about to turn 6, and though I come from a software engineering background and may have been coding for many years, contrary to what people expect to hear, I'm not sure that coding is the right place for her, because as we're going forward, computers that are AI driven are going to be writing much of our source code in the years ahead. So even though we talk about the need in STEM conversations to do that, that's really not where my head is at. I'm thinking about the fact that these technologies that we're all exploring here are going to be able to do many of these things. So I want to get my daughter into a position where she is not competing against a technology to do that, and yet she's using her creativity, she's using her ability to use her brain in over a broad spectrum of things to compete. And when I want her to grow up in a world where AI is helping her, it is something that she is using as a useful tool, and as she gets a little bit older here, I'm going to be teaching her to be thoughtful in how she thinks about this toolkit, because we talk about these terrible outcomes, we talk about these amazing outcomes. Both are possible, and both are likely in the years ahead, and that we will do good things and bad things with AI, and we will recover from the bad things and learn and move on. And so I'm trying to think, how can I raise her in such a world that changes constantly, and in which she can combine with these tools around her rather than fight against them, and have a very good life in front of her.
She should be an entrepreneur.
Yes, and absolutely. And the beautiful thing with AI and technology and all of this is, as much as the algorithms and the machine is going to do some of the work, the chances are of you working alongside with her, multiple generations doing great things, I think is more viable than before.
I also think we need humanists today.
Yes, thank you.
So it's not only about the future where the machines suddenly, it's like, all right, the machines are going to be doing all the work, so we have to focus on our empathy and creativity. That's great, especially if you're into that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of big value-oriented policy questions that, and everybody in the enterprise, one of the things I see, and this is a message around empowerment, is that there's the impression that only the fancy PhDs in machine learning are the people that are governing the AI revolution, and that's not the case. As Anand mentioned, it really takes a combination between business people who know a lot about their work. They've been doing it for a really long time, and all great AI projects start with a subject matter expert who can work together with a technologist. So it's going to be frustrating. You're going to be like, ooh, that's not what I say. Like, what do you mean there? And there's all of these, the yucky tension of two humans trying to meaningfully communicate. And it's great to exercise that in an enterprise environment because we need it for society. And this is probably the biggest social question we're faced with today, is our ability to meaningfully engage with someone who's different from us. And like, that's our big challenge. And all sorts of folks from various backgrounds are required to solve that. So I think it's actually a really exciting time.
I think that's a beautiful place for us to start to end up. For everybody on the live stream, find your technologist if you're a business person, find your business person if you're a technologist, and for both of you, find your data scientist, find your community. I think part of what makes any technology movement happen is people finding their community and having the hard discussions, which we've had today. So with that, I want to thank everyone in this room for making such an interesting conversation happen and such an important conversation happen. And thank you, Adobe, and thanks, ADX Studios. And we are about over and about out.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Great moderating.